Okay, let's talk glutes. So, when we're talking about glute exercises, we're going to talk today primarily about glute max. So, glute max is primarily involved in hip extension. So, hip extension, I think it's important to know what glute max is doing, because then when we talk about exercise selection, we know which exercises we're trying to get maximum glute hitting of glute max without necessarily hitting quadriceps. Especially when we're talking about training females, sometimes they don't want to build up really big quadriceps, and if they do a ton of lunges and squats, they're worried and maybe do see a lot of development in the quads, which is great athletically, but maybe not what they're looking for physique-wise. And so, yeah, when we're talking about glute max, what we're looking at is a muscle that's primarily involved in hip extension. So hip extension, at the moment, I am essentially in hip extension. I'm at about 180 degrees as you go over the hip. As soon as I start to do this and create an angle at my hips, I'm going into hip flexion. And so as I go into hip flexion, my glutes are stretching out and extending. So they are elongating as I go into hip flexion. As I go into hip extension, I'm coming up, and you'll see this angle changing until I start to extend, and you'll feel at hip extension, if you squeeze and push against your hip flexors, you'll feel your glute max really turn on, and that's particularly what you'll feel at the top of a glute bridge and other exercises like kickbacks. You'll really feel the glutes engage. Now, all of those exercises are good. You'll see a lot of ones all fours position, kicking back. There'll be a lot going out to the side. Now that's more glute medius. But if we're talking about going for glute max, one of the issues with those exercises, there's nothing wrong with them as activators, but they're very difficult to load up, so it's hard to put a lot of weight on them, and so the recruitment isn't necessarily that good. You're also not often going through a really great range of motion when we're talking about large amount of flexion into extension or even hyperextension. And so the four exercises that I look at are ones that you can load up reasonably well, tend to be a bilateral motion, meaning that both legs in the same position like this, so we're not doing lunges, split squats, and they're ones that you can do with equipment at home, so you're not necessarily going to need to load the hell out of them. That being said, the first one, often for some people you do need to load the hell out of. So the first one's a deadlift, because the deadlift action is essentially a hip hinge. We pick it up from the ground, we're in hip flexion, soft knees. The knees are flexed, but it's not the primary driver of the movement. And as we come up, we go into hip extension. So here I've got a bag, basic deadlift. I'm not going to go heaps into form here because there's great videos around from powerlifters, etc. Deadlift, but basic deadlift, feet about hip width apart, soft knees, go down with the back fairly straight, pushing the ass out into hip flexion, dragging it straight up my shins, into hip extension, straight back down, straight up, and squeezing the glutes obviously at the top of the movement. Now that's about an 18 kilo bag, so for me obviously this is hardly a heavy deadlift, but if you're ripping that out, 30, 40 reps at home, you're going to get a good pump in glute max. You're not going to build a whole lot of strength, but you will get a good pump, and so you can still get some muscle hypertrophy. So that's the first exercise, deadlift. Second exercise is essentially a dynamic version of a deadlift, which is a kettlebell swing, which is something that fortunately most people are pretty familiar with. I've only got lightish dumbbells here at the moment. You can do it with a dumbbell, just by gripping like this. Once again, feet, I'd say just outside hip width when we're doing a kettlebell swing, and just extend, flexion, extension, flexion, extension. Soft knees, so you're letting them bend, but you're not dipping and rising like a squat. You do see people doing their kettlebell swings and dipping down to almost till it could touch the ground, and then squatting it up and essentially doing a kind of a double arm front raise, which we really ideally don't want. We want to go from hip flexion, because this thing's light, I can kind of do it in slow motion, drive it off our quads, up, and then it just naturally comes back. We catch it, And so I'm trying not to go low, because additionally, if that's a heavy weight, it's going to start pulling on our backs. We're going to get pulled into flexion in the wrong parts of our spine. Not good. So kettlebell swing is the second one. You've got deadlift and kettlebell swing, and both of those are primarily just hip flexion into hip extension. That's what we want. Okay, actually, just quickly, another variation on that, especially if you've only got, say, a couple of light kettlebells. These are 6s. It's really not appropriate for me to be doing 6 kilo kettlebell swings. Instead, I can put my feet together in a fairly narrow stance, still soft in the knees, and do the hip flexion extension with the dumbbells on the outside of my body. And you can see I can still lock out at the hips and get good hip extension. It's not quite, it's hard to get hip hyperextension there, because when you're going down the middle with the feet wider apart, you can recruit your adductors and get the hip to come further forward than you can with that other movement. But it's still a good movement if you don't have either a heavy enough kettlebell, or for whatever reasons going down in that way is a bad idea. So that's the 2, deadlift, kettlebell swing. Third is a pull under. Now you won't be able to see the bands that I've tied over there. This is a TRX attached to some bands. And what we do is step over the TRX, bring it out so there's enough tension. And once again, I'm just going through that same action. So this is me in hip extension, flexion, which is very much like the kettlebell swing. Drive with the hips, hip extension. Now I can go into hip hyperextension on this one and get more recruitment by pulling my hands forward, not up at the end, or you really know about it. Like that. And I'm going through, obviously, don't do that. Painful. Or maybe not for some people, but anyway, pulling through, hip hyperextension. Pulling through, hip hyperextension. Now for setting up a pull under at home, you can do it with 1 band or 2. You just tie it to something at an appropriate height. So for us, we want it just around here for a pull under, because it's normally done with a cable at the gym. So we want to just get some bands attached. You don't need a TRX, you can just do it with the bands. If you've got a TRX, great. And you just need to figure out the distance to get it right. You can do it just with the band, but a lot of bands are really tight doing that, and it'll be a real struggle to get it through, and you end up almost rowing it with your upper body. So see how you go with that. Camera has to turn off now, and we do the last one, which is hip thruster. So far, deadlift, kettlebell swing, and pull under. Okay, so last one in the sequence is a hip thruster. Now this is the same action as a glute bridge. It's essentially a superior movement to a glute bridge because of how much deeper you can get into hip flexion. The issue with a glute bridge done on the flat, on a yoga mat or something at home, you can go up into hip extension fairly well, but when you go back down, you're essentially only going, you can't really go deep into hip flexion. You see what I mean when I go into this movement. So what we like to do is have a weight across our hips. Now a lot of people with bricks would put a yoga mat down. I've just been lazy, so I'll have to let my back in like this. You can have your arms on it or steadying the weight. And what we're going to do is bridge up. So of course, this is heavy, I'm going to need to stabilize the weight. I'm deep into hip flexion here, and then hip extension. Deep into hip flexion. Hip extension, that weight probably needs to be a bit lower. So you want to keep it from rolling. Hip extension. I feel this a lot in the hamstrings as well. Once again, hip extension. And the beauty of a bag is you can chuck it around, it's nice and soft, etc., etc. So those are the 4 movements that you can do at home: deadlift, kettlebell swing, pull under, and the hip thruster. They're all glute max, they're all easy to load up, and I would say if you're doing band work, fire hydrants, clams, all the different glute med ones, continue to do those. Do glute bridges on the ground, sure, but maybe do them as a warm-up and a prelude to these, which you can load up a little bit better. I hope that's useful. Cheers.